Hi, everybody. My name is Anita Simonis, and I'm here, and we're going to be talking about annotating. We're going to be using it and how we use it for better helping our children better understand what they read. We're also going to be talking about using these strategies in the other content areas.
And I am Sheila Sousa Linticum, and kind of just to piggyback on her, this is just a better or a strategy for better comprehension, and we want to make sure that the annotation is purposeful. So we're going to go ahead and show you a couple of strategies to use. So what is annotating? Annotating is when readers make notes. They're going to flag, highlight, draw little pictures just to key into important details as they're reading. So while a student is reading, we want them to mark the sides of their pages. If it's a PDF that they can actually write directly on, they're going to write in the margins of it, highlight directly on that, underline. If it's a novel that we're using, then we're going to offer them Post-it notes, small Post-it notes, and they're going to write those codes down or ideas and notes that they want to take, and then they can stick it right directly into the book on the page. These marks can be teacher given or student created as we go on further in the year, and they consist of anything from symbols to drawings to just highlighting important details, circling words, anything that they're able to hone into while they read. So the comprehension strategies that we're going to focus on today for annotation, there are 4. So there's 1, creating a visual. So we really want our students to focus on the 5 senses while they're reading. We want them to picture what's going on with the setting, with the characters while they're reading. We want them to be able to have this visualization in their mind because the author gives us those details so we can picture this in our mind. Some of the questions that we want our students to ask while they're reading is, why is this visual important to the passage? Or how does this visual that I see help me understand what I'm reading?
And I use an example called the elephant story. And before I start, when I first introduce annotating with my students, we talk about, I have my students close their eyes and I say the word elephant. And I ask, when they open their eyes again, I ask them if what they saw when I said it, did they see the word ELEPHANT, or did they see a picture of a big gray animal with a trunk and big ears? And of course, my students usually say, well, we saw an elephant. And that's when I explain to them, our brain is trained to look for pictures and that we remember things through pictures. And that's the purpose of the annotating in all of our areas, the core areas included. I don't only explain this to my students, but I've had parents ask why we use so many pictures. And I do the same elephant story with the parents, and it makes them understand that, hey, pictures are important and it's going to be a way to help my child remember and my child to learn.
Number 2 is making connections. We want our students to think about the big idea. How is this presented in the text? We want them to be able to connect to the story, that we want them to be able to connect to other texts that they've read to. We want them to be able to connect to the things that are happening in the world, something that they've seen, something that they've heard. So we want them to use those connections to then develop and think about, well, what is the theme that the author is trying to get through, or what is the main idea of this passage that we're trying to understand. Some of the questions that students to think about while they're making these connections are, how does the main idea theme connect to other texts that we have read? How does this story connect to things that you've read or watched? And then what is the author's message in the passage? Anita, how would this look like in 3rd grade? How would a 3rd grade teacher and student make connections while they read?
Well, one of the things that 3rd grade has used, or that I could see being used in 3rd grade, is carrying the same author and looking at how one text is connected to another text or similar to another text, with using the same ideas or using the same vocabulary. And then in 3rd, across making the connections with something that we've learned in social studies, how we can tie that back into the novel that we're reading. And that could happen in third too, but it just wouldn't be as detailed. And then the children being able to discuss why and how they make those connections, and how we carry it over to social studies or science or even math.
Questioning. So students need to remember that all good readers are always thinking and asking questions. Well, what's going on here? I don't understand. Or what's going to happen next when you're talking about predicting. By actively reading, students will develop a better understanding of the text. They should be aware of the difference between a right there. Now, Anita, you call that different in your class, right? You don't call them right there questions or sentences. What do you call them?
I always tell my students that it's not going to jump you up and smack you in the face. You're going to have to look for it. So it's not going to be right there. That seems to get my students' attention a little bit better. But I'll have kids say, Miss Simonis, that's not a smack you in the face kind of question, is it? I'm going to have to go back and look for those answers. So that's our right there and think and search in my classroom.
And when we're looking at those questions and going back to the text, we can always highlight those with different colors. So right there, you're going to have the question and the answer right there together. If you're going to have a think and search, then you're going to have to go through and look at more inferencing, the different clues that are subtly put in the paragraphs. Again, how can we do this in third grade?
Well, I was in third, it might be introduced just the who, and go through and together modeling. The teacher modeling is most important. Going through and choosing one character, coloring that character a certain color, and then things about that character you could also color the same color to go with it. And then at another time do the what, or another time do the where. We draw pictures even in fourth, because our third graders, they're learning this in fourth. They don't have this in third. But we might draw a picture of a setting if it's where, or if it's when and it starts talking about the moon and stars, then we know it's nighttime, so we might draw a picture of the moon, or we might draw a picture of the stars. But we wouldn't do all of it at one time. It would be very separate and simplified more.
Baby steps,
third to fourth to fifth.
And then by the time they get to fifth, we're wanting them to actually use those codes and be able to discuss why did you highlight this, why did you put a code here. And it's big on the discussion when we talk about the chapter.
And I always tell my kids, when they mark something, pretend that I'm standing behind them saying, why did you do that? Why did you mark that? Why is that important? So that when we do discuss either partners or whole group, that they can explain why those things were marked or why those things were highlighted.
And then the last one is inferencing. So when they infer something, students use their background knowledge and clues from the text that the author has given to make an inference. So an inference is just something that that the author does not come right out and tell you. And this is really good when we're talking about characterization, character development. We want to encourage our students to think about why a character did something or said something, why an author may have written it a certain way, and then it creates an environment where students are naturally making those inferences. So some questions that we want them to think about are, what new information were you able to figure out? Why do you think the character did or said this? And then again, in third grade, we want them just to start highlighting.
Yeah, it would be like one character, and if they said that character seemed angry, we might go back into the text and highlight, or even, mark it. It might be on an anchor chart. It might be up on the smart board that we could underline together. Again, they wouldn't be marking in a book, but they could. What are the hints? What are the clues? What did they do? What did they say, or what did they do to make you know they're angry? And we would do one character at a time and just hone in on that one character instead of looking at everybody, and then expand that in fourth.
And then by the time that we get to fifth, we want to actually hone into how the character has changed from the beginning. It could be the beginning of that page, or the beginning of that passage, to the beginning of the chapter, to the end of the entire book. We want to look at those subtle changes that the characters are making from the beginning to the end. And then this ties into those internal conflicts that they're feeling throughout the story, and then how it's resolved. So we're able to make those connections along the way.
Yeah, and sometimes I'll do, I'm going to read this chapter. This chapter is about change. From when I start reading to when I finish, I want you to think about what has happened. That's, why do I say we're talking about change, or why is it friendship? What kind of things happened that made you know that was what we were talking about? Again, discussions is
discussion is definitely the key.
And the kids and the students being able to tell you why they think that, or going back into the text and finding the evidence that supports what they say.
All right, so how do we usually get started? This is going to look different in third, fourth, and fifth. We always start with modeling. We're always going to discuss and model how we want this to look. So I usually start off by just getting out a picture book and reading that picture book, and I'm modeling this out loud. And I may have like a stack of Post-its because it's a book right next to me, and I will go through the story, and I'll talk about the character. I'll be like, okay, here's the main character. I'm gonna put a Post-it up for Blue by his name, and every time I notice something that he's going through or something that he's doing or saying, I'm going to mark it with blue, and I'm going to try and put a little code next to it. And I model this all the way through the story, and I hint at the changes that he's making. I hint at the attitude that he has based on those clues. But modeling is certainly the key. We want to show what this looks like. We want them to hear it. We want them to see it. And then from there, then we can go to guided practice. Now in third grade, you're probably going to stop at this guided practice. You're going to model for several weeks, maybe even months, and then you're going to move on to guided practice. And then this is probably where you're going to stay.
When I first introduced the idea of the annotation with my fourth graders, I might read if it's a picture book, I might read the picture book one time, just read it totally and let them just listen, and then go back and think, oh, well, when I was reading this, this is our main character. Let's see if we can figure out some characteristics or how he's feeling or things like that, and maybe take it in parts. In third, I do that at the beginning of fourth, but you could do it in third. Take it in parts of the book, and maybe not do the whole entire book one day, but just work on a piece of the book. Or, I think this is happening at nighttime. Let's go through and see if we see, and we'll talk about the pictures, and we'll talk about things in the writing that they hear or that they read, and so we'll talk about it throughout the whole story, and then that way, when it comes time to them to read, then they can carry it over, and probably introduce it into one thing at a time.
So then when we go to the guided practice, these are things that I offer my students. And this is actually a picture of an example of, it's off of Pay Teachers. It is a free download that you can get, and they're called think marks. And so we use the terminology think marks in our class. But I offer these examples for them to just get familiar with. And as you can see, they can mark it with LOL, which is something that's funny that made them laugh. A heart is their favorite part. But then I really start going into the connections, and we'll change the codes just a little bit as we go along. We usually start this process together with an anchor chart, like Anita was saying, where we'll talk about together, did anybody find a confusing part? And then they'll share with me what was confusing to them, and we'll write it together and discuss it together. We usually start with an excerpt so we can write directly on the paper again, write in the margins, highlight, underline, circle, and then move on to Post-it notes as we get more familiar with it with our novels.
And then I might, when I introduce it, I'll give them, like, we might work on just make a prediction and a funny part, or make a connection, and I'll just limit it to 2 or 3 of the think marks. And then I might give them a piece of a chapter, or a chapter that I've already read, and say, okay, now I want you to go back through, you read it, and I want you to use 2 think marks. But when you use those 2 think marks, and they might mark it with a Post-it note on the page in the novel, or if they have a copy that could write on it. But I try to get them in the habit of using the Post-it notes. But they have to be able, so that the next day when we come back to class, they can say, well, on page 22, I marked, I made a prediction, and I did that because, and then they give me the evidence of how they made that prediction. What part of that did they pull out to make the prediction? So that everything is, they hear it, they do it independently, but then we talk about it and they discuss it. And then they'll find out that, oh, well, you made the same prediction I did, or you marked the same place I did. We both thought that was funny. Mm-hmm. So everybody can start talking and taking ownership, but they're also making connections with each other in the classroom of they're kind of thinking the same way. So the time of the discussion is probably the most important in getting started.
And it's so neat to hear the kids discuss back and forth, because then we'll be like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. And they'll really start talking with each other about the characters or about the problem. And it's really neat to see them grow within their own annotations.
And predictions is a big one. Well, I think this is going to happen because I read this part. And somebody will be like, no, I think it's going to be this, because, and then it's a back and forth, but then a total surprise when you get to the next page and something totally different has happened. But then they can go back and rethink what they were thinking and then what really happened.
So again, like we were saying, if you're a third grade teacher, you're probably going to stay within that guided practice. And here are some things that you can add to. You can do things like numbering the paragraphs. You're just starting out with numbering paragraphs, finding out whether this is dialogue, whether it's narration, knowing how each paragraph starts. How do you know this is a new paragraph? Is there space? Is there an indentation? And then this can carry through with poetry. How do you know that this is a stanza? What do you see that's different? And just start numbering those.
And in a lot of the SOL practice pages and things we have, the paragraphs are numbered. Mm-hmm. So it made that connection of, oh, well, they have us this way, so it's easier to find our information, but they're already in the habit of numbering the paragraph. Or if the paragraphs are already numbered, we highlight them to draw attention to them so they know they're there. Another thing that we do, and especially in the content areas, we talk in nonfiction, we talk about headings and what headings are and how headings are important in the organization of the text. So we highlight the headings. I teach my students to highlight any bold words, because those bold words are going to be your vocabulary words. You're going to make connections to those. Sometimes there's questions about them, later on if we do comprehension questions or work on the vocabulary there. So we talk about the importance of highlighting and then the bold words.
Then we circle the descriptive words or important nouns that pop out at you. Now in third grade, you're just going to talk about descriptive words and highlight or circle those. But as you get into fifth grade, it really goes into that character development, characterization. But then we also look at those important nouns to tell whether it's figurative language, whether we're making a comparison, cause and effect. So really going into those descriptive words and how we can see those while we're reading. And we use this within all content areas.
Another thing that we do that you could do is summarize each paragraph in a few words or pictures. I do this in a lot of different ways. Sometimes if it's a paragraph, we might just write like a little bullet or something that just tells what the paragraph was mainly about. We might draw a picture. It might be a picture of the setting. It might be a picture of character that's doing something, that we need to remember. The other thing is sometimes I'll have the selection or the notes in this content areas. I'll have the notes on one page, and then on the page next to it, I'll have boxes. And so if they might draw a picture that summarizes each part of the notes. For example, if we did the cause of the Revolutionary War, then we might color through the notes. And then after we discuss the notes and have color coded everything, then they go back and draw pictures, their own pictures for their own ideas of the causes for the Revolutionary War. And so they can look at that picture and make that connection and be able to explain it. And the one thing I tell my kids too is when you're drawing those pictures, just like details in a paragraph or just like details in a book that you're reading, you want to be able to create that picture. So your picture should have as many details so I can look at that picture and know exactly what that picture is about instead of having to guess. So it has to be detailed enough that I can tell you understood what each paragraph was about.
Another thing that we do is chunking the paragraphs together. So if I have two paragraphs that have the same main idea, I'm going to chunk those together, and I can do that by either putting a bracket around it or circling them or even highlighting them the same color. You can even use the Post-it notes and using the same color Post-it note, and then next to it, tell what was the main idea. What were these two paragraphs or three paragraphs or this section mostly about? And you can also do this with theme. What was a theme in this chunk? And then this makes it easier for the students to answer questions. When they go back and have a question about a certain topic, they know exactly which chunk or which paragraph to go back to and find that answer.
And it helps when they are doing like group discussions and class discussions, they can go back to that one section instead of having to look through the entire selection. They can just go to that one part. Another one that we have is underline figurative language in important passages, text that might indicate foreshadowing or what the author's figuring something out. I introduce figurative language with my fourth graders in just recognizing that figurative language is exaggerated ways to say things. Sort of, we say fancy ways to say something, but we will identify those. In fifth, I also do it where we identify them, and then sometimes out beside it, they may have to, like the nightly homework might be go through your Post-it notes, and I want you to use 3 Post-it notes and identify 3 examples of figurative language. When they come back in the next day, it might be take those 3 examples after we talk about them in class. We talk about which ones we marked and what they were saying. Then I might say, take one of those and I want you to draw a picture. I want you to tell me what the example was and then draw a picture of what it sounded like it meant, but then a picture of what it actually meant. So they're looking at the figurative language part, but then translating it into the regular text of what they think. And then sometimes we'll put those up in the classroom. We'll share them with each other because they think it's hilarious when they look at some of the pictures with the figurative language.
And that works great in 5th grade when you're talking about personification and idioms. They're great when you get those pictures of the idiom, what the picture really is saying versus what it's trying to say. Yeah. I get lots of cats and dogs falling from the sky.
Yeah.
All right, so then by 5th grade, especially if this has been taught 3rd and 4th, maybe even by the end of 4th grade, we really want to give the ownership to them. We really want them to have that independent practice. So over time, students will gravitate to annotations that fit their individual needs or their personalities best. So they may not use my teacher created think marks, and they might, usually for me in 5th grade, by January, they're very familiar with this process. They're very purposeful in their annotations. So they're going to create their own codes that mean kind of the same thing. Even though I want them to focus on figurative language or main idea, they're going to come up with their own code for what that stands for. I do differentiate among the amount of marks needed for students. So for example, if I have a group that I've already read it to, I may say, okay, tonight, when you go back and finish this chapter or when you're rereading this, I want you to give me 3. And that's kind of what Anita was talking about earlier. I want you to give me 3 on figurative language. We've talked about figurative language this week, so I want you to find 3 different places where figurative language is used. Or I may say, okay, read this chapter or finish this chapter, and since it's a cold read, I just want you to give me 2 about characterization. So we really try and differentiate that depending on the student's needs.
Right, and the younger students, the 3rd or beginning 4th grade, it might be I want you to go through and just use 3 thinking marks. It might be an exclamation mark for something exciting. It might be you know, the LOL, or some of my kids have put ha ha sometimes for something that's funny, which it that gives them ownership, but also they can explain that in the classroom, so that if I and if I can put them in a small group, then they could say, well, here I put this, even at the very beginning, I put this because, and they'll give the reason, and it might be just 2 to start with. Later on, it might be 4, and a lot of times my kids will say, can we use 5 tonight? Can I go through and use 5? Or do you mind if I used 5? You assigned us 3, but I went ahead and did 5 because I got carried away, you know, which, you know, is great. I'm never going to complain about that. But just so they can explain those connections and those marks that they made, and not just sticking something in because they thought it looked good to have a lot, but to be able to explain, this is why, this is what I was thinking. And that's what the time is, and the discussion is. It's just, you know, giving them ownership, but making them have the evidence, or be able to, you know, give the evidence of why they wanted the support.
So we are going to actually take a moment to practice what this looks like together. So Anita and I are going to demonstrate how this looks like if you were in our class. I'm going to read a passage to her, and she's going to annotate the passage. Now, she had a copy of this, so she wrote directly on this. Now, this is not a passage that I would read to my 5th graders. This is a passage I think you would enjoy, but it's not something that my 5th graders would hear. This is more of probably an 8th grade, 7th, 8th grade text. This is also a text that can be found on Common Lit, along with many others that we highly recommend for you to use. But Anita, feel free to use the list of think marks that I've given you, or create your own to annotate your passage. However, I want you to focus on the following while I read. So there is an internal conflict, and I want you to tell me, what is it afterwards, and then I want you to use your predicting skills. So you're going to be able to tell me what happened, and then after the reading, what do you think is going to happen next to the character or the conflict. Okay, so this one is Lamb to the Slaughter by Roald Dahl, and this is just an excerpt from it, so it's not the whole thing. This is just I'm kind of starting right in the middle. All right, she told herself, so I've killed him. It was extraordinary. Now, how clear her mind became all of a sudden. She began thinking very fast. As the wife of a detective, she knew quite well what the penalty would be. That was fine. It made no difference to her. In fact, it would be a relief. On the other hand, what about the child? What were the laws about murderers with unborn children? Did they kill both, mother and child? Or did they wait until the 10th month? What did they do? Mary Maloney didn't know, and she certainly wasn't prepared to take a chance. She carried the meat into the kitchen, placed it in a pan, turned the oven on high, and shoved it inside. Then she washed her hands and ran upstairs to the bedroom. She sat down before the mirror, tidied her hair, touched up her lips and face. She tried a smile. It came out rather peculiar. She tried again. Hello, Sam, she said brightly, aloud. The voice sounded peculiar, too. I want some potatoes, please, Sam. Yes, and I think a can of peas. That was better. Both the smile and the voice were coming out better now. She rehearsed it several times more. Then she ran downstairs, took her coat, went out the back door, down the garden, into the street.
Okay, so the very first thing as she was reading, I highlighted, so I've killed him. And I was trying to figure out who had been killed. Then I went, as I was reading more, as the wife of the detective, she knew well what the penalty would be, and that was fine. It made no difference. It was like she didn't care. In fact, it was a relief. So she was kind of glad it had happened. But then when I thought about her and the internal conflict, yes, she was glad that she had killed someone, but then she started worrying about the child, and it hit me. It was like an aha, she's pregnant. And so then she started worrying, what were the laws about murderers with unborn children? What happened to them? First she didn't care, and then now she's starting to worry about the baby. Would they kill them both? Did they wait until the 10th month? What would happen? So then I went down and I started thinking about, she carried the meat into the kitchen. She put it in a pan, shoved it in the oven. She washed her hands, and it was kind of like she was done with it. She sat down in front of a mirror, tidied up her hair, touched her lips and face, tried to smile, and she started practicing. Hello, Sam, she thought brightly aloud. I want some potatoes, please, Sam. Yes, I think a can apiece. So it's like she's going to practice to see if she can get away with it. She's trying to put all the other thinking out of her mind and just trying to go on with life and go on to something else. That was better. The smile, the voice were coming out better. She rehearsed it several times more. She ran downstairs and went out into the street. So it was kind of like, yes, she was worried about it at the beginning. Had she gotten away with something, when, glad it had happened, but then the conflict of the child and what was going to happen. So then it was like she was going to make it better, trying to get away with it. So she's just going to practice. So those were just some of the things. I did put a question mark with the, when I first heard it or first read it, I thought, who's Sam and where did Sam come from? But then I went back and read, oh, she's in front of a mirror. So she's practicing. Those are some of the things I wrote down.
Yeah, that's great. So this is a great example of what we eventually, this is a little higher end, but what we want our kids to tone into. So do you have any predictions? Because you have not read this story, and I'm excited. I want you to go home and read it now. But so do you have any predictions? Do you think she'll get away with it?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm afraid to make the prediction. I think she might. I think she's going to put on a big enough show to get by with it to save the baby.
To save the baby?
Yeah.
Yeah, because at first she didn't care, and then she's like, oh, wait, I've got a baby. Okay.
So I think she's going to be a pretty good actress. Okay. So after that interesting reading, I told her it traumatized me, but it doesn't really. I wanted to talk a little bit about how I use the annotation in social studies. Also, I've used it in science and mathematics. I don't remember if I told you, but I teach 4th and 5th grade English or language arts and history. I also, when needed, have taught math. And I've also taught science. So these are just some examples of how to use the annotations in those subject areas.
So why would we want to incorporate this cross-curricular annotation? Well, there's several reasons, but we want to strengthen the students' understanding of unfamiliar words and curriculum. So they're going to see words in reading that they would see in history, that they would see in science, and so forth. We're also helping those students make those connections, like we talked about before. If we're learning something in history, then we can tie it to what they've read about, and then vice versa. It teaches students how to use the connections made during annotating to retrieve that information. So again, when they write something down, it's easy to access in their memory, and it promotes the transfer of learned curriculum into long-term memory. We want to teach them that this can be used across the curriculum so that they can also write in the margins of their history and their science, just so that it helps them retain what they're reading, understanding what they're reading, because it's all about the comprehension.
And I've even had students come back to me, like middle school and high school students, and they're like, Miss Simonis, do you remember when we drew pictures for history? I do that now. I'll make study cards, and I'll do that now to help me have those pictures, or I'll do it when I take a test and I'll draw it on the side. So I've got students who take those annotations or those strategies and carry them up through the upper grades, which I'm always glad to hear. To annotate in other subjects, I usually focus on creating visuals and making connections in the comprehension strategies. They're, in social studies or in history, Virginia studies, they're given so much information. And so with annotation 2, it helps them sort of organize that information. And I call them little file folders. I was like, okay, in your brain, we're going to open up a new file folder and we're going to put in the Revolutionary War, or we're going to work on this. So, and try to keep it separate so that they're not overwhelmed with everything they're learning. But then I will also tie in novels to go in with that too, to support what we're working on. And I teach strategies such as color keys, highlighting and shading, illustrations. When I'm modeling at the very beginning, I'll draw the pictures along with them. I always create a notebook along with my students. So I may have it up on the smartboard. I may have it up on the board, written the notes up there or something, and I'll show them how to do the notes or how to do the pictures. Later on, we'll carry into student created. We also rewrite the information in the ways that's more familiar. We're going to take it from SOL language to 4th grade language, or to 5th grade language, or say 4th grade friendly language. So it's more familiar with what they can remember. So this is one of my examples in Virginia Studies. This is at the very beginning of the school year. And this is the way I introduce it with colors. And so this is our map of the 5 regions of Virginia at the beginning of the year. And I teach them connect it with colors so that everything about our note pages about the coastal plain, Tidewater, we talk about it being the beach and it's sunny and it's, sandy. So we color the coastal plain Tidewater region yellow so that they can make the connection that each time we do this, in any notes that we do about the coastal plain, we always color it yellow so that they make that connection. Oh, it's beach and it's sand, so it's going to be yellow. The same thing with another region like the Blue Ridge Mountains. We color that blue because the Blue Ridge Mountains have the bluish appearance. So we'll color code on the notes and then also on the map next door. And then if I give them a silly saying or something to remember it, we'll all, like a very big potato chip, then they'll color the B for the Blue Ridge Mountains so it all connects together. And we also add small pictures or notes to clarify vocabulary. We drew a plateau for the Appalachian Plateau region. We drew a valley and labeled it beside the notes, and rounded Blue Ridge Mountains. We also add student created definitions. In my classroom, a plateau is a mountain with its head chopped off. So we always will draw that, or we'll always say that as we're labeling our notes. And my kids will do this even on the test. When it gets ready for a test, they'll ask if they can highlight. So they know automatically they'll go and they'll highlight Coastal Plain yellow. They'll highlight Blue Ridge Mountains blue or Appalachian Plateau black. So in their head, they have it organized by colors along with their notes. And this covers the expanding vocabulary and then supporting strengthening their comprehension, nonfiction comprehension in 3rd, 4th, and 5th. This is a science lesson that I did. Again, supporting or working on the SOLs, expanding vocabulary, and then strengthening reading comprehension nonfiction in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. I teach them to connect colors to the materials. In this one, we were talking about temperature. So usually they remember that a thermometer has red in it. So we colored anything about temperature red for the heat and the warmth. We were talking about salinity. So I just picked yellow that we run it. It was about the beach. We're talking about salty water in the ocean. So we would add different things. We also talked about, we broke words in phytoplankton is a plant. Phyto is plant. So plankton is an organism. So we hopefully that would, P for phyto, P for plant. So we try to make any kind of connections that we could. Also on there, equator and warm. I circled equator. We circled warm and we hooked them. We call them rainbows. And we drew a rainbow to connect that anything about the equator is warm. On the salinity, we added pictures and small notes for the vocabulary. Salinity, we wrote salt. And then we have a picture of a salt shaker For the salt water, we drew a thermometer on this page for the temperature. We also were talking about that if anything, if the salinity went too high or too low, that fish would die. So we have a dead fish on our paper. The kids always like drawing things like that. But anything that would make, or the kids might say, well, Miss Simonis, can I draw this instead of what you're drawing, which is what I want to happen. And later on, they'll start that. But at the very beginning, it's very modeled. I usually will put this up, either use a document camera and I'll do it so the kids can see me doing it, or I'll have a copy of it up on the smart board and highlight it or work on it as they do it. But like I said, I build my notebook along with my children. So I have a new notebook each year.
And this is great for really focusing on those words, affixes and roots right there. Like I noticed how you have antifreeze, so you're actually breaking the word
Right.
apart, anti. And this is great practice because they're going to have those roots.
And we'll do words like shallow. We'll write little notes like not deep, anything like that to draw their attention to any of those words. The last one is an example of what I've done in math. And this again has the comprehension, the vocabulary and the comprehension. And a lot of the kids will say, well, how do we do reading in math? And my kids have decided now that I sneak reading into everything that we do. So they've just given up and accepted the fact that they have to read no matter what we're working on. But we used colors again to reinforce the vocabulary and the key concepts. On this one, we were working on quadrilaterals. And so we colored the illustrations to match the specific vocabulary words. This way, when they think of the words, then they can think about the picture that went with it, or everything that goes along with it. So they're consistently using those colors throughout the lessons. On this one, the right angles, we colored red. So in the pictures, the right angles are colored red. Acute angles, we color coded green. So in the pictures and the illustrations, the acute angles are colored green. The obtuse angles were orange. And this is actually flap. So underneath it, when you raised up the flap, it had the definition of the quadrilateral.
And you said that this could also be done as early as third grade too, when you're talking about all of the evidence or all of the clue words for, like, for example, subtracting. They can highlight.
In word problems and go through and say, okay, well, they're going to, they're going to know or tell me that they need to add. I'm going to say, well, what made you add? So we'll go back through and talk about those all together, or subtract what was left or how many more, and draw attention to all that vocabulary over and over. And what I might do is, as we think of those, then write them up on the board also. So they're seeing it, they're writing it, they're coloring it, they're hearing it. So you're getting all the different strategies.
So why annotate? Well, it gives students ownership to their learning and their reading. This allows them to take ownership, and that's the biggie. And we want them to talk about what they're learning. So it improves their comprehension. We can do this through note-taking activities like she just showed us. It has a great positive impact on their comprehension. Annotating what students read is a good way for them to keep track of what they've learned. So in their notes, it gives them something to refer back to later. They can go back when we were talking about chunking and see where a key detail was located by looking at their main ideas, going back. It allows them to dive deeper into the literature through the characterization, the plot, through conflict, like we were talking about with the example of Lamb to the Slaughter. And ultimately, it just increases their critical and analytical thinking skills while reading. There are challenges. We've said it over and over, the key is discussion afterwards. We really want to get them talking, but there are some challenges. This is not something that's gonna be easy to start. You can't just take this and run with it. We want you to run with it, but it's not gonna be something that they're gonna be able to just do tomorrow. In fact, it slows down the reading. It will increase their comprehension. So good readers don't understand why they have to. They don't even think it works, and they don't want to do it because it slows their reading down. However, you can demonstrate how important it is by using just a short detailed quiz and seeing if they can understand or remember everything whereas if they were annotating and taking notes, they would be able to remember. Struggling readers won't do it. It requires too much effort. So I don't ask that my students read and annotate huge sections of the text. I also don't have my struggling readers annotate a closed read. Usually how I do this is I will read a chapter or a passage with them, and then when I ask them to go back and read, that's when they'll go read it again and annotate. I also differentiate the amount of annotations that they're going to be looking for.
And in the lower, like in third grade, you could do a page. I would read a chapter and then say, okay, now I want you to go back to the first page of the chapter or a page in the middle, and I want you to look for a certain thing, or I want you to use think marks on just this. It's slow, and it slows down, especially I always worry in Virginia studies and science. Are we covering it enough? Are we covering it fast enough? But to me, slowing down and teaching it, making sure they comprehend it and understand it is worth it. So it's slow at the beginning, but it gets much better. And the children, they love the idea of it. They're so proud of their work and their notebooks. They're always wanting to show their notebooks to everyone. So it really helps in lots of different areas.
And that's really ultimately, we want them to get excited about reading. And so when they do this and they bring it and they're like, hey, you asked for 2, but I found 5 things that I want to show you. And that's the exciting part for me, is to see them get excited about reading and diving deeper into what they're reading. All right, so remember, annotation takes time. I teach at a school where this is not taught in 3rd or 4th, so I start in 5th grade. So I usually take that first month when we come back of just introducing, modeling, guided. And then when we go into the guided, we do anchor charts, we highlight, we circle. We're not even into the note taking yet. This takes several weeks and months to do. Eventually they get it independently, and I'm always so excited to see that. And every student is different too. Most kids still struggle with the strategy independently after a whole year. So where I'm the only one teaching it at my school, I have some that can run with it in January, and then I have some that I'm like, okay, this is the code that I want you to use, or this is the think mark that I'm wanting you to look for. I'm still giving the teacher given marks for them. It's not easy to teach. It's not going to be like a super quick learn for students. It's best practice when it can be built upon. So like we've been saying, it would be great for this strategy to be started in 3rd grade, with starting to highlight those important details, circle the vocabulary, and building on that for 4th. And then by 5th, students have a stronger understanding, and after more guided practice, can then annotate on their own.
And I'm lucky because I have 4th and 5th, so I have my students for 2 years. So I can use these practices in 4th, introduce them and teach them in 4th, and then carry it over in 5th.
Here are a couple of things that we've just cited for you to go and check out on your own. So like I said, the Teacher Pay Teacher is a free download, and these are links directly to that. I also have a link in there for Common Lit.
I have a link for the picture of the map, the Virginia regions of Virginia map that was there. It's in it's a Teacher Pay Teacher product, and I have that link there. And also, I have used examples of the interactive note-taking. It's interactive reading and note-taking, and I put the link there to check out their information of the trainings and the products they have.
So where do you go from here? We kind of just thought that you could be thinking about a student text that you will be assigning in the next 30 days, or if you're like us and you're done for the year, then something that you want to teach or read next year. And think about how you can adopt annotating in your own classroom. How can you get started with it? Even if it's just highlighting, even if it's just circling, even if it's just bold or headings. And then feel free to email us with any kind of questions, concerns that you may have as you look at your own textbooks, your own novels, your passages. feel free to let us know if there's anything that we can do to help you. So here's our information. And then we do have a disclaimer.